The beginning of the NBA season is almost here, and the best part about this time of year is that every single team in the league has hope, and they all are interesting. I'm going to go through my most interesting player on every single team, the guy that I'm most intrigued by, that I want to see play, see what their season looks like the most for every single team. We begin with the Atlanta Hawks, and to me, it has to be Dejounte Murray, because his fit alongside Trae Young, I think, is going to be the defining factor this Hawks season, because the rest of the roster isn't actually all that great. Like, they have some decent wing depth, they have John Collins, they have Clint Capella, they have some interesting pieces, but in terms of top-end talent, it's Trae Young and it's Dejounte Murray, and that pairing and that partnership is going to be the determining factor of how far they go this season. They could be a top 4 seed, a team that can make the conference finals, or if it doesn't go well and they don't fit well and they can't figure out how to play off of each other with, kind of splitting the on and off ball reps, it could potentially be a disaster, quite honestly. By far, I'm most intrigued by Dejounte Murray for the Hawks this season. Next up for the Clippers, I'm going to go John Wall, because if you look at a ceiling raiser on this roster, outside of obviously the health of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, I think John Wall is that guy. Right now, Reggie Jackson's a starting point guard. I think he's earned that. He's been really good for them for the last couple of seasons after coming over as a buyout guy. But John Wall apparently has looked really good, and you never really know what you're going to get from a guy that hasn't played in as long as John Wall hasn't played. But last time we saw him fully healthy, he was an all-NBA caliber guy, and I think he's someone that can be a really, really impressive piece for a team that has a ton of depth. I'm really intrigued to see just what he looks like in his return to NBA basketball. Next up for the Celtics, I'm going to go with Robert Williams. First, we have to see, when Robert Williams is going to play. He had another knee procedure, but if Robert Williams is healthy, the Celtics are the most dominant defensive team in the league based off what we saw from them last season. He unlocked so many different things for them because he's gotten better at defending on the perimeter, and he's one of the best rim protectors in the league. And if he continues that, the Celtics, if he's healthy, in my opinion, are still a team certainly to be accounted for despite all the drama for their team heading into the season. Next up, Golden State. I'm going to go Jonathan Kuminga. I almost put Jordan Poole here because of how, his scoring kind of fits into this group, but Kuminga, in terms of an upside and a ceiling piece, is right up there with some of the most interesting players in the entire league. There's some weird reports and rumors that have been going around pretty much all offseason about some immaturity from him and some poor decisions he's making. It hasn't really been elaborated on exactly what that means, but in terms of his play on the basketball court this season, if he can continue to improve as an offensive player, potentially be a better off-ball shooter, he has all the tools athletically and defensively in terms of getting to the rim and in transition. I'm really excited to see if he can continue to raise the ceiling of this team, because it's clear that him and Wiseman are the two guys that, if they're going to continue to get better, it's going to be because of those two guys and some of the other younger guys on the roster. Next up for the Pelicans, there's only one answer. It's Zion Williamson. When you have a guy that has played just a handful really of NBA games, but when he has played so far in his young career was an all NBA caliber player, put up one of the most ridiculous statistical lines we've ever seen from a player at his age, you have to kind of pick that guy as he comes back from injury. He looks really good. He looks fantastic. He seems like his relationship with the organization is as good as it's ever been. And this Pelicans team, I've talked about it in other videos, just from a talent perspective, might be one of, if not the best rosters in the entire league. I don't know if they're going to put it all together. I don't know if they're going to be at a guard. There's so many different things they need to figure out for a team that has basically never played together. But as Zion is who he was, pre-injury riddled stuff from last year, it's going to be an unbelievable team to watch. I can't wait to watch them. I think that's actually the Nets' first game of the year as well. Next up, Chicago. Give me Patrick Williams. I thought about putting Alonzo on here because of the knee injury stuff that he's going through. Apparently they got it sorted out. He is going to come back at some point this season, but I wanted to go with a player that's healthy to begin the season, and Patrick Williams is that guy. Again, a lot of these players to me are like determining factors, like X factors for their season. If they're good, if they're healthy, the team could be good. It could raise their ceiling, and Patrick Williams is that guy. He almost feels like a forgotten player for Chicago because, he got hurt early last year, and we haven't really seen him a ton since they drafted him, but he's a unique player in terms of his skill set on this roster as a guy that can defend. Hopefully he can play well offensively, brings them great size and versatility. A lot of especially the front court players in Chicago are very one-dimensional. The versatility of Patrick Williams is something I'm really paying attention to in Chicago. Next up, the Cavs. I went with Isaac Okoro because when you look at this Cavs roster, they've got Jared Allen, they've got, I almost said Lauri Markkanen, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, the newly acquired Donovan Mitchell. There's a big issue at the 3 spot. They need a wing that can guard and can shoot. And Isaac Okoro can guard, and he can score pretty well in transition, but he is not a very good off-ball shooter, and he's exactly what this roster needs. They don't have any other players on the roster really that they can count on to fill that spot. You saw it last year when they're running Lauri Markkanen out there at the 3 alongside the other 2 big guys. And if Isaac Okoro can somehow become like a half decent off-ball shooter, it changes changes everything for this roster, because there are teams out there like this that could be, borderline championship contenders if they could get a couple of wings they could guard and shoot. It's a glaring weakness on this Cavs roster, but the difference for them is they have a guy that could possibly fill that role if he can continue to improve. All eyes, I think, on Isaac Okoro, along with obviously the exciting stuff of, new star Donovan Mitchell. How is he going to play with all these other guys? But if Okoro's really good, that changes a lot of stuff for Cleveland in terms of their potential to make a finals run this season and moving forward. Next up for Dallas, I went with Tim Hardaway Jr. Just because Jalen Brunson is no longer there. Hardaway Jr. coming back from injury, and they're really going to be relying on him offensively. In the absence of Jalen Brunson, he's a guy that has scored well for them in the past. Not a ton of really interesting players unless you want to go with like Josh Green here on this roster, so I went with Tim Hardaway Jr. Next up for Denver, it's absolutely Michael Porter Jr. If you want to go with Jamal Murray, that's fine, but mostly it's the guys returning from injury, right? Because those are, again, the ceiling-raising players. We know what Jokic is. They added some really nice pieces. I like the addition of Bruce Brown in this roster. They brought in KCP. They moved Monty Morris. And so if they get like top-level Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. play this season, they're a championship contender, in my opinion, one of the best teams in the Western Conference. But if we continue to see some issues that we saw from him pre-injury, where maybe he's a little bit, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but he's kind of just in his own little world at times, especially offensively. If we get that version of Michael Porter Jr., I think the ceiling is kind of capped here. And obviously, if he's not healthy, that contract starts to look really, really bad. Next up for Detroit, I went with Cade Cunningham. I thought about Sadiq Bey. I thought about Jaden Ivey, but ultimately the argument around Cade has always been like, okay, how good is he actually, right? Like, because you would think that they would have won at least a little bit more games last year. He would have been a little bit more impressive statistically, but the argument has always been when you get better players around Cade, he kind of continues to raise the level of those guys. And if you have a not great roster around him like you did last year, he's going to be good, but he's not someone that's like Luka level good that's going to get you, 45 or 50 wins with a really bad roster. But as you continue to add good players around him, what he does well continues to be amplified, and I'm really interested. I think that's the case, by the way. That's kind of the argument I've made for Cade. I'm really interested to see if that is the case with an improved roster this season. Next up for Indiana, I'm going to go Cyrese Halbert, and we've talked about this in the past. I need to know if Cyrese Halliburton is like a borderline All-NBA caliber guy moving forward, or if he's like a borderline All-Star or just like a really good starter caliber guy moving forward. I need to know that if I'm Indiana in a season where we're really not going to do anything. We're not interested in our results this season. We're worried about player development, and I need to know where Cyrese Halliburton lands on that scale in terms of his future potential, for lack of a better word. And if he's on the lower side, that tells me everything I need to know in terms of who I want to be drafting this upcoming draft. Next up now is Houston, and I went with the rookie Jabari Smith Jr. because if there was a rookie that didn't look great in the first handful of picks in the draft in Summer League, it was him. And I made this case before in the Summer League video, like, don't get too concerned about Jabari Smith in Summer League, because the things that he does well and the things that he's going to add to this Rockets team are going to be shown so much better when he's around better guys and when he has players out there to set him up offensively, because he's never been like this premier isolation scorer guy that's going to create a ton. He's a great off-ball shooter with great size. He can score a little bit on 1 to 2 dribble moves in the mid-range, but he's not this guy that's going to go out there in Summer League and average 25 a game with not very good players and or spacing around him. But the defensive versatility and the spacing, I think, is going to look fantastic for him now that he's on the real roster and playing real NBA games. And I'm interested to see if that kind of theory proves true to begin the season. Next up now, Miami. I went with Tyler Hero. I don't really think there's another answer here, just because this is the year now for Tyler Hero. Like, he wants a new extension. He wants to be a starter, and I'm imagining Miami is going to give him both of those things. And if they're not a better basketball team for it, I think that tells us a lot about Tyler Hero as a player. Now, if he can continue to grow and develop offensively, become a better playmaker, and give more effort defensively, that changes a lot of things for Miami and their ceiling moving forward. But if he's basically the same guy that he has been, which is a really good sixth man, but in starter minutes, I don't really think that moves the needle much for Miami, and I'm really interested to see how that all works out. Next up now for the Lakers, you could pick 6 different guys for this, right? I went with Kendrick Nunn because apparently he's running with the starters, and I find that interesting for a guy that didn't play at all last year. However, in his time in Miami, he has been a pretty good scorer, someone that, you can count on to run some offense with the second unit, play on or off the ball alongside LeBron, alongside Russ, alongside AD. And the fact that he's out there running with that starting unit as of now, I think is interesting, and apparently he looks pretty good. So if he can be another scorer for them and step it up a little bit defensively, that could be big for the Lakers. Next up now, Milwaukee. I went with Brook Lopez just because, I want to make sure that he's healthy. He's a really important piece for them that allows them to, play bigger or smaller, perimeter spacer for them, obviously. And they really relied a lot on Giannis at the 5 last year without Brook Lopez out there, and having him healthy for the regular season and for the postseason really helps their matchup. So I'm interested to see if he is going to be healthy. Next up, Brooklyn. I put Ben Simmons. Again, you could put a handful of different guys here. Of course, KD with the awkwardness of the trade request and then walking it back, the Kyrie situation. But I put Simmons just because in terms of actually watching basketball and seeing what Ben Simmons looks like, I am by far the most interested in what he looks like in this system alongside KD and Kyrie, because it could be really, really good, or if they get off to a poor start, things could get really dramatic really quickly in Brooklyn. Next up now, the Knicks. I went with Julius Randle because obviously this is an all NBA caliber player a few seasons ago and a guy that just quite frankly didn't look all that good last year. And so where do we fall on that scale with Julius Randle? Was a couple of years ago the real version, or was last year the real version? I have an idea of what I think, but I'm curious to see how all that plays out this year with a slightly improved roster in New York. Next up now, Minnesota, is Deangelo Russell, because I think with this new and improved roster where they bring in Rudy Gobert to play alongside Karl-Anthony Towns, of course Anthony Edwards continuing to grow and develop, if there's an odd man out on this roster and a guy that they might potentially look to move down the road if things don't go well this season, it's Deangelo Russell. So this is a fit in or a fit out year for Deangelo Russell, in my opinion, if he can improve defensively. He improved a little bit last year in a bit of a weird role, but if he continued to be a little bit more disciplined, a little bit more locked in defensively, and understand his role offensively, basically getting out of the way of the other couple of guys that are really good offensively, and just be a connecting piece, a playmaking connecting piece, and a really good second unit distributor and playmaker, I think all those things work for Minnesota. But if he's bad defensively and thinks he should be the number one or number two option on offense too often, that's going to be a problem. I'm really interested to see how he fits alongside the other pieces there in Minnesota. Really interesting Minnesota team this season. Next up now, Phoenix. It's Deandre Ayton. It's not close. It's been a weird couple of months for Phoenix, and specifically for Deandre Ayton. He doesn't seem that excited to be there, quite frankly. He doesn't seem to have a very good relationship with the coach. That all feels like a problem for me, for a guy that has been very vocal about the fact that the second contract in the league was something that he was focused on from the minute that he got there, and that situation didn't go all that well for him. And so if there's a situation where Phoenix falls apart this season, I think it starts with some Deandre Ayton unhappiness, and I think they're kind of halfway there already. Next up now, Portland. I put Anthony Simons again because I'm looking for like high upside young players that could make a leap. He's certainly on the list for Portland. He's a really talented scorer, someone that put up great numbers when healthy last year, but now he's got the big contract. He's going to continue to prove it and prove that he can play well alongside Damian Lillard. Really interested to see what he looks like this season. For Orlando, I went with Franz Wagner just because of how incredible he looked at international competition this summer, I should say, and someone that I think could continue to make a leap and really grow and develop and raise our expectations of him even further than we already raised them last year after being a late top 10 pick. Next up now for the Kings, I went with Keegan Murray because he is in a lot of people's minds, biggest reach of the draft, where they picked him over Jaden Ivey, and he looked really good in Summer League, and maybe he's going to be an awesome fit for them as a wing that can score and can shoot and can defend. There's a lot of really interesting things to like about Keegan Murray, and I want to see if he can continue what he showed in Summer League in actual NBA games. Next up now, Philadelphia, I went with Tyrese Maxey because, again, we're looking at ceiling raisers. If you want to kind of think about Philadelphia as a championship contender this season, which I am, Tyrese Maxey is one of the main reasons, and his continued growth and development and that backcourt combination alongside James Harden in terms of how unstoppable they can be offensively and what Maxey could potentially provide defensively with his quickness are it's a really interesting combination. I can't wait to watch Tyrese Maxey play. For San Antonio, I went with Keldon Johnson. He's currently hurt, should be ready for the start of the season. That's just the most interesting young player to me. I think it's the best player on their roster. And again, kind of like the Cyrese Halbert thing, you need to understand where he falls in terms of his future potential as you continue to build the roster moving forward. Toronto, it's Scotty Barnes, and it's not close. This is the guy, you could have had Kevin Durant. Like, if Toronto was willing to trade Scotty Barnes, they could have Kevin Durant on their roster right now. And that's a lot of pressure on a guy that, yes, looked really good last year, but has to continue to grow and improve and develop. And I have full faith that he's going to continue to do that. But all eyes, every time someone watches a Raptors game, are going to be on Scotty Barnes and seeing how he continues to grow, especially offensively, when you could have had someone as devastating offensively as Kevin Durant this offseason had you chosen to trade Scotty Barnes. Next up now, OKC. I went with Josh Giddey because I feel like there's actually a good amount of like things that we know about OKC. We know Shea is really good. We know they've got a lot of interesting role players, guys like Lou Dort, but the ceiling of Josh Giddey, I feel like, is still a little bit uncertain. I really like him, but if he can't figure out the perimeter jump shot, that really puts a cap on his ceiling. But he's talked a lot about improving his jump shot, their new shooting coach, all these different things. Josh Giddey is someone that I'm watching a lot this year, I feel like, if he's healthy. Next up now, Charlotte. I went with LaMelo because he's really the only interesting player on the roster. There's a couple of other guys that are at least relatively intriguing, but I really feel like that's the only answer for Charlotte. For the Jazz, I honestly put TBD. It kind of just depends on what their season looks like, and if there's a young player that develops and kind of jumps out to you. I guess you could put Colin Sexton here, but I'm honestly not overly interested in anything Utah is doing on the basketball court this season. Next up, Memphis. I went Zaire Williams. Again, ceiling raiser, a guy that looked good in limited opportunities last year. Incredible athlete. If he continues to grow and improve offensively, especially as a perimeter shooter, that's someone that could be playing 25, 30 minutes a game for Memphis this season, a team that has a lot of options, especially on the perimeter. Zaire Williams is certainly a high upside guy, and that's why they moved up to draft him last year. Then last up on the list is the Washington Wizards, and I put Kyle Kuzma because, again, not a lot of super interesting pieces on this roster, but someone that improved last year, someone that raised their ceiling in terms of what they can look like into the future. Kyle Kuzma is a critical piece there, and I want to see him continue to grow and develop this season. And that is my most interesting player for every single team in the league. Let me know down in the comment section below who you would have picked for each of these teams, or maybe for your favorite team. And let me know how excited you are that we are just a few short weeks away from the start of the NBA season. Thank you guys for watching the video, and I'll see y'all next time.